What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved comedians sits down for what should be a light-hearted interview, only to find himself under attack from a host who seems determined to tear him down? Today, we're diving into the explosive moment that left Jim Carrey walking off the View stage, and trust me, you won't believe how this all unfolded. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story gets absolutely wild. The studio lights were bright that Tuesday morning as Jim Carrey settled into his chair on The View, that familiar grin spread across his face. He was there to promote his latest project, expecting the usual banter about his career, maybe some laughs about his iconic roles. What he got instead was something entirely different. Joy Behar leaned forward in her chair, her expression already showing signs of the confrontation to come. "So Jim," she began, her tone carrying an edge that immediately caught the attention of everyone in the studio. "Let's talk about your recent comments regarding the entertainment industry. Some people are calling them unhinged." Jim's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Well, Joy, I think when you've been in this business as long as I have, you start to see things differently. You see the machinery behind the magic, and sometimes that can be, well, eye-opening. Eye-opening or delusional." Joy shot back without missing a beat. "Because, to a lot of people, it sounds like you've completely lost touch with reality." The other hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances. Whoopi Goldberg shifted in her seat, clearly sensing the tension building. Sarah Haynes looked down at her notes, while Sunny Hostin raised an eyebrow at Joy's aggressive approach. Jim's expression hardened. "I'm sorry. Are we having an interview here, or an interrogation? Because I thought I was coming on to talk about my work, not to be psychoanalyzed by someone who's never walked in my shoes." "Oh, please," Joy scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Spare us the victim act. Jim, you come on these shows, you make these bizarre statements about Hollywood conspiracies and spiritual awakenings, and then you get upset when someone calls you out on it? Bizarre statements?" Jim repeated, his voice rising slightly. "Joy, I've been nothing but honest about my experiences. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe the problem isn't with what I'm saying." Joy leaned back in her chair, a smug expression crossing her face. "Honest? Jim, you've claimed that celebrities are all puppets in some grand scheme. You've talked about ego death and cosmic consciousness like you're some kind of guru. Do you realize how that sounds to normal people? Normal people?" Jim's eyes flashed with something between hurt and anger. "Joy, with all due respect, I don't think you get to decide what's normal for anyone. I've had experiences that have changed my perspective on life, on fame, on what really matters. If sharing that honestly makes me sound crazy to you, then so be it." The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something far more intense than the usual View conversation. Cameramen adjusted their positions, making sure they captured every moment of what was clearly becoming a heated exchange. Joy wasn't backing down. "Jim, you made millions of dollars entertaining people, and now you want to bite the hand that fed you? You want to tell everyone that the industry that made you rich and famous is somehow evil or corrupt?" "I never said evil," Jim replied, his voice steady but strained. "But yes, I think there are aspects of this industry that are unhealthy. The constant need for validation, the way people are treated as commodities, the pressure to maintain an image that might not be authentic. Is it so wrong to talk about that? Thanks for watching. With my next on you, and in quote, REC next on you." "What's wrong?" Joy interrupted. "Is pretending like you're some kind of victim when you've benefited more than most people could ever dream of. You've made a fortune making people laugh, and now you want to act like Hollywood is some kind of prison?" Sarah Haynes finally spoke up, trying to defuse the situation. "Maybe we could talk about Jim's upcoming project? I know our audience would love to hear about what you're working on now." But Joy wasn't finished. She turned to Sarah with an annoyed expression. "No. I think this is important. Jim's out here spreading conspiracy theories, and anti-industry sentiment. And I think our viewers deserve to know where this is coming from. Jim sat forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly. Conspiracy theories? Joy, I've shared my personal journey of self-discovery. I've talked about realizing that chasing fame and money wasn't fulfilling me. How is that a conspiracy theory? Quote, because you're implying that there's something sinister about an industry that employs millions of people, Joy fired back. You're feeding into this narrative that Hollywood is somehow controlling people's minds or manipulating society. That's conspiracy theory territory, Jim. You're putting words in my mouth, Jim said, his frustration becoming more apparent. I've never said anything about mind control or manipulation. I've talked about my own experience with feeling empty despite having everything I thought I wanted. I've talked about finding meaning beyond material success. If that threatens you somehow, I don't know what to tell you. Joy laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Threatens me? Jim, I've been in this business longer than you have. I've seen plenty of celebrities have midlife crises and start spouting philosophy. The difference is, most of them don't do it on national television while bad-mouthing the very industry that made them relevant. The tension in the studio was palpable now. Whoopi looked like she wanted to jump in, but seemed unsure how to handle the situation. The other hosts were clearly uncomfortable, while Jim appeared to be reaching the end of his patience. You know what, Joy? Jim said, his voice quiet but intense. I came here thinking we could have a real conversation about art, about life, about what it means to be human in this crazy world. Instead, you seem determined to paint me as some kind of delusional has-been who's lost his mind. I'm not painting you as anything, Joy replied coolly. I'm asking you to explain why you think it's appropriate to use your platform to spread negativity about an industry that's given you everything. Given me everything? Jim's voice was rising again. Joy, do you have any idea what it's like to lose yourself so completely in a character, in a persona, that you forget who you really are? Do you know what it's like to have millions of people love an image of you while you feel completely hollow inside? Oh, boo-hoo, Joy said with mock sympathy. Poor little rich actor having an existential crisis. Jim, you signed up for this life. Nobody forced you to become a celebrity. That comment hit something deep in Jim, and everyone in the studio could see it. His face flushed, and for a moment, the mask of composure he'd been wearing completely slipped. Jim stared at Joy for a long moment, his breathing slightly labored. When he spoke again, his voice was different, colder, more controlled than anyone had ever heard from him in public. Nobody forced me to become a celebrity, he repeated slowly. You're right about that, Joy. But nobody warned me that I'd be sitting across from people like you either. People who seem to take pleasure in tearing others down for having the audacity to grow and change. Joy's eyes narrowed. I'm not tearing you down, Jim. I'm asking you to take responsibility for your words and actions. There's a difference. 1. Responsibility? Jim let out a bitter laugh. Joy. I've taken more responsibility for my life in the past few years than I had in the previous decades combined. I've looked at my mistakes, my choices, my patterns. I've done the work to understand why I made the decisions I made. What I won't do is apologize for speaking honestly about what I've learned. Whoopi finally decided to step in. Jim, I think what Joy is trying to say is that when you have a platform like yours, your words carry weight. People listen to what you say. And that's exactly why I feel obligated to tell the truth, Jim replied, turning to Whoopi with a more respectful tone. Whoopi, you of all people should understand what it means to use your voice authentically. I'm not telling people what to think or how to live. I'm sharing my own journey. But Joy wasn't done. Your journey includes making statements that could damage other people's careers and livelihoods. When you talk about the industry being fake or manipulative, you're not just talking about your own experience. You're making broad generalizations that affect real people." "What real people?" Jim asked, his patience clearly wearing thin again. "The executives who treat actors like commodities? The agents who care more about their commissions than their clients' well-being? The publicists who craft fake personas and sell them to the public? The thousands of crew members, the writers, the directors, the producers, the craft services people," Joy shot back. "All the hard-working people who depend on this industry to feed their families. When you paint Hollywood with such a negative brush, you're diminishing their work too." Jim shook his head. "Joy, you're deliberately misunderstanding what I'm saying. I've never attacked the hard-working people who make movies and television possible. I'm talking about a system that prioritizes profit over people, that values image over authenticity. Those are two very different things." "Are they, though?" Joy leaned forward again, her voice taking on a prosecutorial tone. "Because it seems like you're happy to take the money that comes from that system while simultaneously condemning it. Isn't that a little hypocritical?" The studio fell silent except for the low hum of the cameras. Jim looked at Joy with an expression that seemed to be calculating whether she was worth the energy it would take to respond. "You know what's hypocritical, Joy," he said finally. "Pretending that asking someone to be authentic is somehow an attack on their character. You've been in this business for decades. You've seen what it does to people. You've watched talented individuals lose themselves in the pursuit of fame and fortune. And yet here you sit, defending a system that you know can be destructive, simply because it's been good to you personally." Joy's face reddened. "I'm defending an industry that has provided entertainment, jobs, and economic growth for this country. I'm defending the idea that maybe, just maybe, successful people should show a little gratitude instead of constantly complaining about how hard their privileged lives are." "There it is," Jim said, a sad smile crossing his face. "Gratitude. That's what this is really about. Isn't it, Joy? You think that because I've been successful, I should just shut up and be thankful. Never mind that success without fulfillment is just a prettier form of misery." "Oh, please," Joy rolled her eyes. "Jim, you sound like a self-help book written by someone who's never had a real problem in their life." That comment landed like a physical blow. Jim's entire demeanor changed, his face hardening in a way that made everyone in the studio shift uncomfortably. "Never had a real problem?" he asked quietly. "Joy, do you know anything about my childhood? Do you know what it was like growing up in poverty, watching my father work job after job just to keep our family afloat? Do you know what it was like to feel responsible for making everyone around me happy because humor was the only tool I had to cope with pain?" Joy looked momentarily taken aback, but she quickly recovered. "Jim, I'm not trying to diminish your background, but let's be honest here. You've been wealthy and famous for most of your adult life. Whatever struggles you had in childhood, you've had the resources to address them for years." "Resources to address them?" Jim's voice was rising again. "Joy, you can't buy your way out of trauma. You can't purchase self-worth. You can't write a check to fill the void inside you that comes from spending years pretending to be someone you're not. Money doesn't fix everything, despite what you seem to believe." Sarah Haynes tried once more to redirect the conversation. "Maybe we could talk about how your experiences have influenced your creative process? I imagine that kind of self-reflection must impact how you approach roles now." But Jim was looking directly at Joy, his eyes intense and focused. "You want to know what I've learned, Joy? I've learned that the people who are most threatened by authenticity are usually the ones who are most invested in maintaining their own masks. I've learned that when someone attacks you for being honest about your struggles, it's usually because your honesty makes them uncomfortable about their own choices." Joy's jaw tightened. "Are you psychoanalyzing me now, Jim? Because last I checked, you're not a licensed therapist. And last I checked, you're not a licensed critic of other people's personal growth." Jim fired back. "But that hasn't stopped you from spending the last 10 minutes trying to tear apart everything I've shared about my own journey. The tension in the room was reaching a breaking point. Sunny Hostin looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Whoopi was shaking her head slightly, clearly wishing the interview had gone differently. "You know what I think, Jim?" Joy said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I think you're going through a phase. I think you'll come back to reality eventually. And when you do, you'll realize that all this spiritual guru nonsense was just another form of acting. Another character you decided to play because the real Jim Carrey wasn't interesting enough anymore." The words hung in the air, like a poisonous cloud. Jim stared at Joy for what felt like an eternity, his face cycling through emotions: hurt, anger, disappointment, and finally, something that looked almost like pity. "Another character," he repeated softly. "Joy, what if I told you that all those characters I played, all those roles that made people laugh, those were the performances? What if the person sitting here right now, trying to have an honest conversation about what it means to be human? What if this is actually the real me?" Joy shrugged dismissively. "Then, I'd say the real you is a lot less entertaining than the fake version." The silence that followed was deafening. Jim sat motionless for several seconds, processing what Joy had just said. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his eyes, a clarity that hadn't been there moments before. "You know what, Joy?" he said, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable finality. "You just proved everything I've been trying to say about this industry. You just demonstrated exactly why so many people in entertainment are miserable. Why they turn to substances. Why they have breakdowns. Why they sometimes take their own lives." Joy tried to interrupt, but Jim held up his hand. "No. Let me finish. Because this is important. You just told me that the real me, the authentic me, is less entertaining than the fake version. Do you understand what you just said? You just told a human being that their authentic self has less value than a performance." The other hosts were staring at Joy now, clearly uncomfortable with the direction she had taken the interview. Whoopi was shaking her head more visibly, while Sarah looked genuinely upset. "Jim, I didn't mean it like that," Joy started, but her voice lacked conviction. "You meant it exactly like that," Jim replied firmly. "And that attitude, that belief that people are only valuable when they're performing for your amusement, that's exactly the toxic mindset I've been talking about. That's exactly why I had to step away and figure out who I actually was underneath all the characters." Joy's face was flushed now. Whether from anger or embarrassment, it was hard to tell. "Jim, you're being overly dramatic. I was simply pointing out that your fans fell in love with your comedic work, not your philosophical rambling." "My philosophical rambling?" Jim repeated, and for the first time since the interview began. He smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Joy, I shared with you that I grew up in poverty, that I struggled with trauma, that I found myself lost in fame, and had to do the difficult work of rediscovering my authentic self. And you called it rambling." He stood up slowly, reaching for the small microphone clipped to his jacket. "You know what? This is exactly why I don't do many interviews anymore. This is exactly why I'm selective about the platforms I use to share my thoughts. Because there are people like you who seem to think that vulnerability is weakness, that growth is nonsense, that authenticity is somehow less valuable than entertainment." Joy realized she was losing control of the situation. "We could have had a civilized conversation," Jim replied, carefully removing his microphone. "But you chose to turn this into an attack. You chose to mock my journey, my experiences, my growth. You chose to tell me that the real me isn't good enough for your audience." Whoopi finally spoke up. "Jim, please, let's just take a breath here. We can start over." Jim turned to Whoopi with genuine respect in his voice. "Whoopi, you're a class act, and I have nothing but admiration for you. But I'm not going to sit here and allow someone to tear apart my character while hiding behind the guise of journalism. This isn't journalism. This is bullying. Joy stood up as well, her voice rising. Bullying? Jim, you came on this show to promote your work. Part of that means being able to handle tough questions about your public statements. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Tough questions? Jim laughed, but there was no humor in it. You attacked my mental state, dismissed my experiences, mocked my journey, and told me I was less valuable as an authentic person than as a performer. Those aren't questions. Those are insults wrapped in the pretense of journalism. The studio audience was completely silent, watching this exchange with a mixture of fascination and horror. Some people had their phones out, clearly recording what they knew was an unprecedented moment in television history. Joy's voice became shrill. You're being incredibly unprofessional right now, Jim. This is live television. You can't just walk away because you don't like the direction of the conversation. Jim paused and looked at her with what appeared to be genuine sadness. Joy, do you know what's truly unprofessional? Inviting someone onto your show under the pretense of promoting their work, and then spending the entire time trying to tear them down personally. Do you know what's unprofessional? Using your platform to attack someone's character, instead of engaging with their ideas. He turned toward the cameras, addressing the audience directly. You know what, folks? This right here is exactly what I've been talking about. This is exactly the kind of toxic environment that exists in parts of this industry, where people are valued only for their ability to entertain, where authenticity is seen as a flaw, where personal growth is mocked and dismissed. End quote. Joy was becoming desperate now. Jim, you're making a scene. This isn't necessary. Making a scene? Jim turned back to her, his eyebrows raised. Joy, you spent the last 15 minutes making a scene. You turned what should have been a pleasant conversation into a character